Let's hear some more views. Let's speak to Frederika Roberts. Frederika lives here in Yorkshire, passionately keen that we should remain in the EU, and Frederika took part in our sort of debate into the in the run-up to the whole business of the Brexit vote. Good morning, Frederika. Welcome back to BBC Radio York.
Good morning, Jonathan. It's great to be back.
Now, what is your take on the fact that MPs have allowed the strong possibility, if Theresa May doesn't on the third attempt get her Brexit policy through next week, politicians have voted for the strong possibility that the Brexit date is delayed, and maybe delayed quite substantially?
Well, I think the first thing is that really they had to do this, because whatever happens, if we were to leave without a deal, we couldn't just crash out on the 29th because we're simply not ready. Not that I think we'll ever be ready to crash out, but, it would be even more disastrous than it could be. So we would need a delay to actually do some preparations in earnest. If we were to leave with a deal, again, there's lots of legislation to be passed at our end, and it also needs to be ratified by the European Parliament. So because Theresa May has left it so late, and let's not forget that she could have brought the meaningful vote to Parliament before Christmas, she decided not to, and she has pushed it further down the road, a point where MPs really had no other option but to vote for a delay, simply because it's not possible to leave on the 29th of March.
Sorry, can I just stop you there, Frederika? Because a lot of people say, of course it's possible for us to leave on the 29th of March. We simply walk away with no deal whatsoever. This country will survive, we'll be happy, we'll be strong. It really isn't an issue, we just go.
Well, they may well say that, and a lot of people do say that, but the reality is that any kind of responsible government, and I'm not entirely sure how responsible I would accredit this government to be at the moment, but any responsible government could not do that to its own country, to actually plunge a country willingly at a time when we're not actually in wartime conditions, into effectively wartime conditions of rationing, of medication, of food, of things like essential radioisotopes needed for diagnosis and treatment of cancer not being able to get into the country. I know people say this is scaremongering, but these are absolutely verifiable facts that these things cannot be guaranteed in the case of a no-deal Brexit. And it is also a verifiable fact that the government hasn't done enough preparations for that kind of possibility, as much as it is possible to do preparations. So to actually plunge us into that kind of chaos would be completely irresponsible, and understandably Parliament is not willing to countenance that, and they've made that very clear.
How strongly do you believe that? Because you've just made reference to it yourself, talking about scaremongering. Project Fear, it very often gets labelled as no radioactive isotopes for cancer treatment, no drugs coming in, food shortages, all these things. They are labelled by people who support the idea of Brexit as stuff and nonsense.
Well, I think they need to actually look at facts and data and analysis rather than actually listening to the kind of populist stuff that's being said by people like Johnson, etc. Even Gove, who actually talked before the referendum about the wonderful sunlit uplands that we were going to face, has now actually said that a no-deal Brexit would not be a good idea because he's now working with farmers and is realising how it's going to affect farmers, for example. So it really isn't realistic to say that we can just crash out and we'll be fine. And if people say, I've heard many people say to me, we're British, we're strong and all of that. Well, yes, we are British, and I can say that now because on Tuesday I became British as well. But we are British, we are strong. But the point is that is a far, far cry from what was promised in 2016, that we would have all this extra money for the NHS, that we would have all these amazing things happening. And actually what's happening, we're spending far more than the savings that were promised on the NHS every single week just to make Brexit happen. It's going to cost an absolute fortune to crash out. Even to leave with a deal would be crash out, would cost humongous amounts. The trade deals that were supposed to be the easiest trade deals in history, well, we've had, 7 now, and they're hardly earth-shattering. So all of these promises that were made are not being delivered on, and they can't be delivered on. I'm afraid the argument that we'll be absolutely fine just doesn't wash with me.
All it will take, Frederika, because I'm sure you know better because you follow this extremely closely, I know, and by the way, congratulations on your British citizenship.
Thank you.
All it will take is one of the other 27 EU countries to say, actually, you guys may want to delay Brexit, but we're going to use our veto and say, no, you can't. You leave on the 29th of March, which was the date that was set, and that's when you go. We're going to block it. We're going to veto it. Apparently, Nigel Farage is trying to encourage some of the smaller countries to say that. So the delay might not be able to happen.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I'm so glad you brought up Nigel Farage's actions in the last few days, because isn't it interesting that the person that has been shouting the loudest about taking back control is the one that actually, when Parliament is taking control of proceedings, is wanting to take that control out of the UK's hands, out of Parliament's hands, and is literally begging other countries to stop us from doing what it is our sovereign right to actually decide to do. Now,
but lots of people say our sovereign right, our sovereign duty is that Parliament enacts the will of the people. And you'll have heard this as many times as I have done, that this country voted by 52% to 48%, 17 million people said leave the EU. And a lot of people are regarding exactly what politicians did in the House of Commons yesterday as frustrating the will of the British people. To use that expression, kicking the can even further down the road, no prospect of anything changing in any great way, just hanging out for the possibility that we won't leave the EU, because that's what so many politicians want, but it's not the will of the British people.
Okay, let me come back to you on that. So the British people, there are about just under 68 million people in this country. 17.4 million voted to leave the EU. So to keep saying that it's the will of the British people that we leave the EU is simply a fallacy, because, you know, a very small majority of those who voted in the referendum wanted to leave the EU. Now, I'm not saying that the rest of the country don't want to leave the EU, but what I'm saying is that the rest of the country either couldn't or didn't vote, or voted to remain in the EU. And out of those who didn't vote, there would have been many reasons for that, but quite a few of them, probably because they just simply didn't feel very strongly one way or the other. So to assume that therefore the majority of British people want to leave is a big leap. However, having said that, Parliament is not there to actually just do what its electorate wants. The argument that MPs have to do what their voters want, well, actually, it's always used by Leave MPs and Leave voters, saying that in regards to Remain voting MPs, but nobody actually says it about Leave voting MPs in Remain constituencies. And actually, I don't say that about those either, because MPs they're not delegates, they're representatives. They're not there to do what they're told. They're there to do what they believe is in the best interests of their constituents and in the best interests of the country, based on the information they have. And their job is to analyse the information in far more detail than the rest of us have time to do, because it's their job to do so, and to actually make those decisions.
Frederika, I'm going to stop you there. You've been very eloquent. I want to bring in another caller, maybe someone who's got a different point of view to you. It's been good to speak to you this morning. Congratulations again on your British citizenship.